Okay, so moving on, and last but not least in this part of the badge is probably the most simple. You've already accomplished the hardest tasks of the badge, but this part is probably my favorite. This is called Google Fonts. Now, Google Fonts, as I explained in the first video, is an extremely powerful tool. The difference, to give you a quick background, there's differences in an embedded font versus a font that you pull in that's a web font from a website such as Google Fonts, which is probably the #1 web font out there, or web font website. So yes, you can, if you have a font on your computer that you use in Word, for instance, or if you're a designer and you use it a lot in Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, etc. There is a way to do that, and that's called @FontFace, but that's a whole different CSS category. With this, Google Fonts makes it extremely easy to choose a font out of tons of different fonts that are constantly added every day of all different styles, such as serif, sans serif, which means, for those of you who may not know, serif is with like the little tails on each of the ends of the letters, and sans serif is more like this, where it's like the Roba Sans, where there's pretty much just straight type, no detail to it. So an example would be like this versus Times New Roman or something like this. And then they have others like display handwriting, monospace, and you can even choose like the number of styles that include thickness, slants, how many display on the page at once, languages that are compatible. So an interesting way, let's say on my site, for instance, I included, I can find in my code, an extremely interesting font here, which I believe I called in my CSS, it is called Griffy. Now, what Griffy does, what this line of code, before I show you how to embed a Google font, is pretty much saying to the browser, is saying, find Griffy, which will be linked to Google Fonts, which I will show you in a sec, and if the browser cannot find that font, just display a cursive font that probably looks as similar as possible. And the same goes here with my Jumbotron header, which you can see listed here. This font is also a Google font, and what that is saying is find Merriweather, and if not, just put a serif font, which means with these little tails on each of the letters, like a T or S or I, any of that. So anyways, so now you go into Google Fonts. So you find a font you want, and let's say you want Diplomata. You literally click the plus button, and you can add multiple ones. So you could click Roboto. Let's see, you want Open Sans. Alright, so we have 3 different fonts, as you can see here. It says this at the bottom. So now you can either delete them, or let's say you want to keep them. So now all you have to do is you copy and paste this, which is a link to the style sheet including the fonts. So you just copy and paste this, and you put it at the beginning in the header of your page. So where you have your Bootstrap stuff, I just commented it and said this is my Google Fonts. You just copy and paste the link from Google Fonts right here, and you paste it in your header right here. This is going to tell the browser, go to this website and find this specific font. Now if you have multiple, it will say find the multiple fonts. Within your CSS, which you either have as an external sheet like I do, or within your document itself, the main page, you just pretty much, you create a class. Now, some of you may have worked with it, some of you may not. So I just called ptext for my paragraphs, which just stands for paragraph text. So I said class equals ptext. And once that's done on each of the paragraphs, I literally, in my CSS, just wrote dot ptext. Dot means class, a hashtag means an ID in CSS. So you just write dot ptext, and you have to spell it completely correct. This is how I spelled it. And between the opening and closing bracket, you just copy and paste the correct font you want. So let's say you wanted to put Roboto. You just copy and paste it from your Google Fonts browser and paste it straight into that class. And you can stylize it by giving it different font sizes or colors, and that's all up to you. But literally that's as simple as it is. So it's just a matter of finding the font you want on Google Fonts, copying and pasting this link and putting it at the top, and then copying and pasting this and putting it in your CSS. And then at the end of your website tutorial, your website should look something like this. So you should have a Google font for, I guess, your header, which would be a good idea. Include an image of Quinnipiac, or I guess whatever page you're trying to make a fake or a simple page about. And then you're going to want to have your Google Translate, I put at the top, which is simple. Then you're going to want to have your title of your information. You're going to want to have your paragraphs, and now all your paragraphs should also be stylized with your Google font. And depending on where you want it, at the bottom you should have your Quinnipiac University or other locations map, and that should be sized correctly from the past video. So yeah, a lot of this it might take a little to get used to if you've never worked with CSS or any of these types of services. I know it took me a second just to understand Google Maps with the key authentication, as you can see here. And I trust that no one's going to be using that key, because that was just created for a test. So yeah, once you have all that, your page should look something like this and should be responsive because of Bootstrap. And yeah, so let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next video. If you've done this all correctly, your badge is all correct.